Have you ever stopped to consider that sometimes your greatest strength is exactly what's holding you captive? We like to think that once we become stronger, wiser, and more resilient, we naturally break free from toxic cycles. But what if the opposite is true? What if the stronger you become, the tighter the emotional trap gets? Think carefully. Why is it that every single time you finally feel ready to walk away from someone who drains you, they appear again with an urgent message, a sudden crisis, a carefully timed plea for help that hits exactly where your heart is softest? It's almost as if your strength, your endless empathy, your kindness, your unwavering willingness to give is precisely the target they're aiming at. The cruel irony is you're never trapped by your weaknesses. You're trapped by the very virtues you value most deeply. Your compassion becomes the invisible chain they pull. Your kindness turns into the quiet voice, convincing you, just one more time, they'll change. Carl Jung once gently suggested that the greatest challenge we face in life isn't becoming who we truly are, but knowing when to stop rescuing others and start saving ourselves. But how do you do that when your heart aches at the thought of turning away? Ask yourself now, are you truly saving someone else each time you return? Or just postponing the moment you have to face your own fears, your own doubts, your own path forward? Because maybe the real crisis isn't the one they've created for you. Maybe the real crisis is this moment, right now, when you must decide who you will rescue first, them or yourself. The final trick someone toxic uses against you isn't physical force or direct confrontation. It's manufactured vulnerability. They don't break your defenses. They gently coax you into dismantling them yourself, piece by piece. They know precisely that your kindness and compassion, the qualities you cherish most, aren't your shields. They're your weakest points, ripe for exploitation. Think of your kindness as an invisible anchor. Something you once saw as stable and secure now silently keeps you tethered to a situation you've long outgrown. You tell yourself you're strong enough to leave, yet the very second you find your feet firmly planted outside that familiar door, a message arrives. An urgent call in the middle of the night. A desperate plea for help you feel you can't refuse. Suddenly, the strength you thought was your liberation becomes the rope that pulls you back in. Have you ever paused and wondered, am I truly helping them, or am I unknowingly helping them hold me captive? Because every time you answer their crisis, you're not just responding to their need, you're renewing their power to control you. Sarah learned this painfully clear truth. She had finally left a relationship defined by manipulation and emotional exhaustion. She believed, genuinely believed, that this time she was free. But at exactly 2 a.m., her phone screen lit up. The message read, "My mom is seriously sick. She always loved you. I promise I just need you one last time." Sarah stared blankly at the screen, her stomach tightening. She knew deep in her bones that replying would erase everything she'd painstakingly rebuilt. Yet how could she ignore the guilt already swelling inside her chest? Has there ever been a moment when you've found yourself exactly where Sarah was, trapped between the compassion that defines you and the fierce desire to finally break free? It's a subtle, quiet torture. You don't simply risk losing your freedom, you risk losing faith in yourself. Each time you return, each time you let them pull you back into the drama, you erase your own progress. It's as if every step forward suddenly vanishes, replaced by the suffocating realization that you're exactly where you started. That closed door you thought you'd walk through was never truly locked, because you've always held the key in your hand. Yet, how many times have you turned back? Convinced you were needed, convinced you were doing the right thing? Think about it honestly. Who might you become if, just this once, you refused to turn back? What new version of yourself would emerge if you resisted the impulse to respond, no matter how strong that impulse felt? The real crisis isn't the one manufactured for you. It's the choice you're facing right now. Will you choose the person you've been, always ready to sacrifice yourself at a moment's notice? Or will you choose the person you're becoming, someone brave enough to protect your boundaries and your hard-earned peace? True compassion doesn't demand your destruction. It never insists you burn yourself out just to provide warmth for someone else. You don't need to be a candle consuming itself for the sake of another's comfort. Genuine kindness, the deepest form of empathy, involves setting firm boundaries. It's the quiet courage to say no when every instinct inside you screams, yes. Recall those countless nights when you've given up rest, sacrificed sleep, abandoned your own emotional health because someone else's crisis seemed greater, more urgent, more important. How often have you convinced yourself, just one more time, even as your body begged you for peace, your heart longed for rest? Today, perhaps for the first time, let yourself ask a different question. Am I willing to say no, even if my heart desperately wants to say yes? Because kindness isn't defined by endless sacrifice. Real compassion begins at the moment you recognize the person who most urgently needs your kindness might actually be you. You don't need to betray yourself to prove you care. You don't need to dismantle your boundaries to prove your goodness. You are enough. Your worth doesn't depend on your willingness to be available at all costs. The person who needs your compassion first and foremost is staring back at you in the mirror. Maybe the reason it hurts so much each time you return isn't because you're failing them, but because you're repeatedly failing yourself. Recognizing this isn't selfish, it's essential. Because in the end, compassion isn't measured by how much of yourself you give away. It's measured by the courage you have to finally protect your own peace. The most profound moment of awakening isn't loud, dramatic, or even obvious at first. It's a quiet realization, whispering gently but persistently. Your kindness, your compassion, your genuine empathy, these beautiful qualities you hold so dearly, have been quietly weaponized against you. It's the moment when clarity hits. A delicate yet unbreakable truth piercing through layers of denial, obligation, and misplaced responsibility. Have you ever truly felt the raw ache of discovering that your deepest virtues have been used as subtle tools of manipulation? Maybe it was the middle of the night, after responding yet again to a plea that disrupted your newfound peace. Or perhaps it was a silent moment of exhaustion, staring at your reflection and not recognizing the weary person staring back. It's when you finally understand that the heaviness you've carried was never truly yours, but something placed upon your shoulders by those who understood exactly how to exploit your kindness. In this moment, a powerful yet uncomfortable truth emerges. No one can truly manipulate your strength unless you grant them access. And every time you said yes, when your heart desperately needed you to say no, you willingly handed over the key to your own freedom. But here's the incredible revelation. The door to freedom you believed was locked against you, barring your escape, has never actually been locked. You've always held the key within your grasp. The cage was never external. The bars were constructed from your own deeply held beliefs about duty, kindness, and sacrifice. The narrative that convinced you that love means endlessly giving, even to your own detriment, has silently imprisoned you far longer than any external force ever could. Imagine for a moment you're standing before a door you've perceived as immovable, heavy, sealed shut by years of guilt, obligation, and emotional debt. Now imagine slowly, cautiously, placing your hand on that door and discovering, to your astonishment, that it moves freely beneath your touch. Imagine the overwhelming clarity as you recognize that this barrier was never real. It was a mirage, held firmly in place only by your belief that it existed. This door is your choice, your voice, your right to reclaim your life and your peace. What if the real act of compassion, The deepest kindness you can offer isn't endlessly giving yourself away, but bravely reclaiming your power. What if true strength isn't measured by how much emotional weight you can carry for others, but by your courage to gently yet firmly set that burden down? Pause and truly ask yourself now, who would you become if you never again surrendered your power for the sake of someone else's comfort? What if your new definition of kindness involved protecting your boundaries as fiercely as you've protected others? Who would you finally allow yourself to become if you recognized once and for all that self-sacrifice isn't love? It's self-neglect disguised in honorable intentions? Perhaps you've always believed that letting go means abandoning someone, but maybe, just maybe, letting go actually means refusing to abandon yourself anymore. Maybe compassion is less about how long you can withstand someone else's storm and more about finally sheltering your own heart from the relentless rain. Think back to those countless moments when you've convinced yourself to stay, to help, to rescue, even as your spirit desperately called out for rest, clarity, and freedom. Think about the promises you've made, not just to them but to yourself. Promises that you'd never let anyone treat you that way again. Promises that this was finally the last time. Why were those promises always easier to break when they were made to you, rather than to others? As you stand at this crossroads, holding this fragile yet undeniable truth, imagine who you could become if you chose differently. If today became the moment you turned inward, not outward, to offer your compassion. What strength, confidence, and self-respect might you discover if, just this once, your kindness was directed back toward yourself? The key has always rested quietly in your palm. The door, invitingly unlocked, has always waited patiently for your recognition. Freedom isn't about waiting for someone else to change or hoping circumstances will shift. It's about your quiet, courageous decision to walk through the door you've kept closed by your own compassionate hands. Can you see now that freedom isn't something you must fight for or earn from others? Freedom is simply the decision to stop betraying yourself for the sake of others' approval or comfort. It's the courage to say with unwavering clarity, "My heart matters too." Ask yourself now, clearly and honestly, who will I finally become when I refuse to surrender my power ever again? Will you become the person who respects their own limits as deeply as you've respected others' pain? Will you become someone who understands that genuine empathy never demands self-sacrifice, but instead honors and protects your emotional health? Will you embrace a version of yourself who moves forward without hesitation or apology, choosing peace over chaos, freedom over familiar pain? Because once you recognize that your compassion was manipulated, you are no longer a prisoner to kindness, you're liberated by clarity. The chains dissolve the instant you refuse to place them around your own wrists again. In the quiet after this realization, take a deep breath and ask yourself gently, am I ready now? Am I finally ready to embrace a kindness that includes me? This right here is your moment. The awakening is gentle yet powerful, simple yet life-changing. This insight you've uncovered is a quiet revolution of the soul. It is the most profound liberation you will ever experience, not by fighting your way out, but by simply peacefully choosing yourself first. Because in the end, the most profound act of compassion isn't endlessly saving others. It's bravely choosing to save yourself. Freedom is not the moment someone else stops manipulating you. It never was. Freedom comes quietly, powerfully, in the precise moment you finally decide you're no longer willing to give your strength away. It's that unmistakable shift, subtle yet life-changing, when you understand your worth doesn't depend on how much you sacrifice for others. For so long you've waited, hoped, perhaps even begged for someone to change or circumstances to improve. You've yearned for apologies or explanations, waiting patiently for the storm around you to clear. But what if the storm was never yours to endure in the first place? What if your only responsibility was to step quietly out of the rain and back into the shelter of your own strength? Consider this honestly. Have you ever truly asked yourself why you've always chosen others over your own inner peace? Was it kindness or fear that made you say yes, even when your heart begged for rest? How many nights have you stayed awake, carrying burdens that weren't yours, convinced your goodness was measured by your willingness to suffer quietly? Maybe you've believed that if you held on a little longer, if you gave a little more, somehow it would be enough. But true compassion never asks for your self-abandonment. Love in its purest form never requires you to betray yourself. You deserve the same kindness you've offered so freely to others. The question is, are you finally ready to accept it? Imagine, just for a moment, a life where your strength is celebrated rather than exploited. Imagine mornings that begin without anxiety, nights ending without emotional exhaustion, relationships founded on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. How much lighter, clearer, more vibrant could your world become when you're no longer tethered to someone else's endless chaos? Because the truth is, the door to freedom was never locked. It was merely waiting patiently for you to choose yourself first. The key has always been within your grasp, hidden gently in the quiet courage it takes to say, "This time, I choose me." This moment, right now, isn't just a realization. It's an invitation. An invitation to finally turn inward and discover who you might become when your strength is reclaimed, your heart is honored, and your boundaries are lovingly protected. Who could you be if today became the moment you stopped abandoning yourself? Who would you allow yourself to become if your kindness finally extended to the person who has needed it most, you? Take a breath and ask yourself softly, sincerely, am I ready to stop sacrificing my peace for someone else's comfort? Am I ready to finally choose myself without hesitation or apology? If deep within you feel the gentle whisper of a yes, if your heart quickens slightly at the thought of finally putting yourself first, then take this small yet powerful step with me now. Write down a simple sentence, clear and direct. This time I choose me. Just by writing those words, you're doing far more than marking a page. You're marking the beginning of your freedom. You're stepping beyond manipulation, beyond emotional entrapment, into a new chapter defined by courage, compassion, and profound self-respect. Because in the end, freedom was never about changing someone else or waiting for permission. True freedom is this quiet moment, here and now, when you finally choose yourself.